Morning all. The Prime Minister has delayed the announcement of its fiscal statement from next Monday to November the 17th. The extra 3 weeks will be used to reconsider where spending will be cut to fill that black hole in the government's finances. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 30 and 40 billion pounds. Now, one option that appears to be back on the table is putting up pensions by less than the rate of inflation, in line with wages instead. To discuss that and much, much more, we're joined once again on the programme by Nadeem Zahawi, this time Conservative Party Chairman, so congratulations on the new job. Let us start with the fiscal statement being delayed. There was a real need not that long ago to steady the markets, which was why it was brought forward from November to the 31st of October. Why then are we seeing this delay?
Well, I think because the Chancellor and the Prime Minister, quite rightly, you've got a new cabinet, new Secretaries of State, getting familiar with their departments, felt that having an autumn statement on the 17th of November will give everyone around the table a bit more time to be able to look carefully. There's not going to be any easy decisions, I can tell you, because I've been there myself, been Secretary of State for Education. Of course, I was Chancellor for a short period of time over the summer, and then as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Cabinet Office, the sort of the operations side of government. But what the Prime Minister wanted to do is make sure that we, circle back and look at everything closely. The important thing to remember is, as he said yesterday, he'll always be on the side, and he mentioned pensioners, of those most vulnerable in our society. He was the Chancellor that delivered the £1,200 additional help for the 8 million most vulnerable households. So we'll look at all of that in the round, and the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, will then make that autumn statement on the 17th of November.
But this is undoubtedly going to be a Prime Minister who is going to have to deliver significant cuts to public spending, isn't he?
He said that yesterday. There's not going to be any easy decisions. You have to step back a second and think where we are today. We have war on our continent. This is a major war. We haven't seen anything like it since the Second World War. Putin is using energy as a weapon, not just we saw when I was in the Treasury, where gas prices were spiking so suddenly that many businesses, viable businesses, were worried about being put out of business. The energy intervention we made has made a difference. But actually he's using it, if you look at what's happening with food costs, because energy then reflects into food prices. So the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are determined that we send a very clear message to the markets that we are financially responsible.
Completely.
And we have an energy plan to deliver that energy security for this country in the medium term.
And all of us understand the necessity to reassure the markets. That's because of what Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng did. And look, I understand that you are not the Chancellor and you're not in a position to kind of perhaps be specific on the intimate detail of what is going to be announced on the 17th of November. But the triple lock on pensions, I mean, your colleague Maria Caulfield puts it like this: when the government doesn't confirm one way or another, speculation mounts, vacuums are created, people start to worry. I've got pensioners who are worried. Can you tell us this morning what will be happening with the triple lock?
So I think it would be unwise of me to preempt the autumn statement. This government is about responsibility and sustainability. What I would say to pensioners watching this morning is both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor are very much aware, and I'm going to state the obvious here, is pensioners are uniquely unable to work to and add to their income or improve their income.
Inflation. That suggests it should be tied to inflation rather than wages. So again, if you're not in a position to answer that question, we can move on.
It's irresponsible to preempt an autumn statement. With an autumn statement, governments wait until the Chancellor's done the work to be able to make those announcements in the appropriate and proper way.
We are expecting Shell, massive petrochem giant, to announce its profits in the next few minutes, and it's expected they will run into the multiple billions. 60 billion was an estimate I saw this morning somewhere. At a time like this, when such difficult decisions, as you've just conceded, there will have to be cuts to public services made. Isn't now the time to look again at the windfall tax, expanding its scope, making it broader and using some of that money to plug the hole that we all know exists, in part because of what Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss did?
So I'm glad you mentioned the windfall tax, because there is already a windfall tax on the energy producers. And of course, that's producing about £5 billion of additional income into the Treasury. And of course, we went further because what Kwasi did, quite rightly, was look at those who generate energy, who were not changing anything in their model, renewables and nuclear, but whose price was pegged to gas price. So we were paying a much higher price for energy.
Giving him a it's 9.5 billion. Don't you think we could maybe take some of that off Shell and use it to pay nurses a bit more money?
So,
I mean, those are the calculations that you have to make. Look, if you can't commit to expending the windfall tax, I know that's a job for the Chancellor, but just personally, don't you think there's an argument for it?
Well, as I said, we already have a windfall tax. The important thing actually is to make sure those companies are investing in gas assets in the North Sea. This year we've seen a 26% increase in our gas output. That's a good thing because we're less reliant on Putin's gas.
You just banned
we have to, well, no, hold on a second. We have to make sure that those companies will be incentivized to invest. So what Rishi's done in the past, if you remember, is incentivise, for example, the BT and others to invest in broadband.
If the question of whether or not it's going
by
to be
using
extended,
the tax system.
We are going to move on. But just finally on all of this, before we move on to the kind of the internal problems in the Conservative Party, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, of course, was sitting where you were yesterday, and we got onto the issue of Qatar and the World Cup that is taking place there. I just want to get your views. His words yesterday were, to football fans, particularly to gay football fans, to be respectful of the host nation, to show a little bit of flex and compromise. I mean, was the Foreign Secretary telling people to dial down the gay if they want to go to the World Cup?
No, he wasn't.
Well, what
Absolutely not. So what he was saying is the policies of the government of Qatar are not our policies, nor would we condone them. And in fact, we use our relationship to make sure that every opportunity we get to share our values, to share how we behave in this country with countries like Qatar and others. But they have their own culture and ways and have come to where they are at from a different journey.
Is it any surprise that there aren't more out gay footballers when FIFA awards the World Cup to Qatar?
Well, look, the World Cup is in Qatar. I think it's important, as I said, to always, at every opportunity, and I was, till very recently, responsible for equalities in this country, to make the point that these values are universal, they're important values, and other countries need to go on a journey as well.
Should any future World Cup be held in a country where gay people cannot walk down the street holding hands, for goodness sake?
Look, as I said, the policies of countries like Qatar are not our policies, nor do we condone them. And I think that's the message I want to send to anybody watching this programme today.
Let's talk about the Home Secretary, and we have to spend a bit of time on this. We heard from Jake Berry yesterday. He characterised the situation as multiple breaches of the ministerial code. Is that accurate?
So the Prime Minister has looked at this. The Home Secretary herself, if you recall, in her letter, said, I made a mistake. I'm not going to deny that or shirk away from it. I will resign. She resigned, quite rightly. The new Prime Minister dealt with this yesterday, looked at it, and he felt that she, and as I would feel, she is allowed a second chance.
So there were multiple breaches of the ministerial code there.
So
the use of the personal email address, the leaking of sensitive government information, sending it to the wrong email address. I mean, that in and of itself are multiple breaches. But again, we will ask the same questions that were asked in the House of Commons yesterday. Did officials raise concerns about Suella Braverman? Did the Cabinet Secretary warn against her reappointment?
So officials raise concerns and raise points with Secretary of State, with ministers all the time, and I think they should be allowed to do that. And having discussions on air about what officials advise ministers, I think would be unhealthy for the way we run our country, because they have to feel free they can do that without being quoted publicly.
The Home Secretary. There is a security dimension here. I mean, does she have full security clearance?
The Home Secretary has full security clearance, of course, but what I'm really trying to say to you is she didn't, try and hide away or try and brush this under the carpet.
Report it. Despite the fact that Rishi Sunak claimed that yesterday in the House of Commons, it wasn't the Home Secretary who reported her behaviour. It was identified, and she got sacked for it.
She admitted her mistake.
She resigned.
She resigned, and she apologised. And actually, people, in my view, I hope you agree with me, are allowed a second chance.
Yes. I understand the opportunity for redemption, but when you're the Home Secretary dealing with sensitive security documents, I'd say that possibly you need to spend a bit more time in the wilderness than 6 days after you get sacked for a security breach. I mean, it's been dressed up as if this is some kind of technical breach. Let's examine exactly what she did. She leaked immigration policy and data to a fellow traveller in terms of migration policy using a private email address. I mean, that isn't just a breach of the ministerial code. That is her undermining the government for whom she served.
Well, as I said, she admitted her mistake. She resigned. A new Prime Minister came in, looked at the information and decided that he wants to give her a second chance. I think that's the right decision. It's the right thing. You just said redemption is a good thing. Politics now, it has been compressed in terms of timelines because of the change we've just had. So if it happened a month from now or 2 months from now...
Does this government take people for fools? It is clear that she was only reappointed because Rishi Sunak needed to reach out to the right of the party. I mean, it's not as if Suella Braverman is the intellectual powerhouse of the Conservative movement.
Well, you're now personalising and being very rude about a particular politician. I think Suella is very capable. It's unfair for you to say that, so I would just ask you to reflect on that point.
I'm asking why
she is incredibly capable
to fill the post of Home Secretary, other than the person who got sacked from it 6 days ago. I mean, don't you understand that there is a degree of frustration that people have, that there is this kind of wash, rinse, repeat cycle in government at the moment, that someone messes up royally, they apologise, and then they act as if the apology somehow makes everything, peachy again.
No, wait a second. You said apologise. She resigned. She didn't just apologise, keep me on. She resigned and apologised, and a new Prime Minister came in and looked at the information and decided to give her a second chance.
This isn't the first time we've been here. Gavin Williamson, now back in Cabinet. Priti Patel, sacked from international development, back into the Home Office. Chris Pincher. You could equally argue, Boris Johnson got sacked by the party a handful of weeks ago, and at the weekend you were campaigning for him.
Let me tell you why. Because I called him Boris Johnson 2.0. I didn't want to see... or give the perception to the country or to our membership that we are somehow conspiring to keep the man who delivered a mandate for all of us, because we all own that mandate, being kept off the ballot. It had to come from him. Now, I'm going to say something to you. If it was Boris 1.0, he would have probably kept going because he had the numbers. Boris 2.0 decided to put country and party ahead of self-interest and step aside and support Rishi Sunak. I'm very proud of that. That's a good thing. We've come together as a party, as a family, around that table. Look around that cabinet table as a cabinet of all the talents. That's a good thing, and it should be celebrated. And you may disagree with me, but I think people are allowed a second chance, and I think the Prime Minister did the right thing to give Suella that second chance.
I will note again, though, that you concede that there were probably multiple breaches of the ministerial code, and indeed that probably officials advised against her reappointment as Home Secretary. But there is a revolving door policy going on in government at the moment, particularly in senior posts. I mean, here's a question, and you and I, we have spoken an awful lot over the past few years, particularly when you were Vaccines Minister. I've always appreciated your candour during some of those interviews. Can you tell me how many jobs you have had in government since 2019?
Yes, I can. Because I'm very proud. So I've been the business secretary, business minister. I never made business secretary, vaccine minister, and I'm very proud of what we delivered on vaccines. I was Secretary of State for Education, where we did skills, schools, families, and I know the Secretary of State for Education will continue that journey on skills.
9 jobs. You've had 9 jobs in government since 2019. Now, some of those were held concurrently, I will concede.
Yes.
But at the same time, doesn't that demonstrate why this government has a real problem getting to grips with problems as they arise, plotting policy that lasts longer than 3 weeks, let alone 3 years? I mean, someone like you, who has been through 9 ministerial jobs, Gavin Williamson back in government, Suella Braverman, this is not a government that looks as if it is performing, surely.
So you mentioned Gavin Williamson, and I think, I've said this on Sky, actually, some time back. Gavin Williamson did more to drive the skills agenda, T-levels, where new and incredibly exciting runways for young people to get a career, to get onto that career ladder. He did a tremendous job on skills. So I think keep attacking people. He's been out of government in the wilderness. I tell you where I'm going to agree with you. You're right, we've had instability. We've made mistakes. Rishi Sunak said, I'm going to correct those mistakes. You're going to see from Sunak a person who is reflective, who's on top of the detail, who's about sustainability of the economy, and having a plan to deliver for this country when we have war on our continent.
Well, we will see how long that lasts. Mr. Zawi, it is always great to have you in the studio, so I do appreciate your time. Thank you. Let's have a quick look at the papers, though. And where should we start? We'll start with the Eye today. It reports that Rishi Sunak could be set to make far-reaching spending cuts next month after ripping up his predecessor Liz Truss's economic plans. Well, with the fracking ban reinstated, doubts again about the pensions triple lock. The Guardian says the Truss legacy has been rejected. But the Express asks, do you really want to scrap the triple pension lock again? According to the Telegraph, tax rises could again be on the cards. The Financial Times says the 3-week delay to next Monday's fiscal statement by the Chancellor will give him breathing space to work out how best to balance the books in the face of the economic crisis. Well, of course, you heard me mention it whilst we were talking to Mr Zahawi. The oil giant Shell has published its third-quarter financial results. Our politics and business correspondent, Amanda Akins, joins us now on the programme. Amanda, what are we learning?
Well, in the past quarter, Shell made bumper profits of $9.5 billion. Now, that is slightly less than during their record last quarter when that figure was $11.5 billion, but obviously still a huge amount. The company says the drop is down to weaker natural gas trading and a reduction in oil refining margins, but it's still massively up on the same quarter this time last year when it was $4.1 billion, a real indication of the impact on energy markets of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, these huge sums of money flowing into the oil and gas companies will surely reignite calls for an expansion of the windfall tax. In May this year, the current Prime Minister, then Chancellor, announced a 25% windfall tax on the excess profits made by these companies, on top of the 40% tax they were already paying, which was estimated would bring in around £5 billion a year, but a lot of it could be offset through a tax relief scheme if companies invested in new extraction projects. Opposition parties have been calling for that windfall tax to be massively expanded. Labour believe if they did so and scrap the tax relief scheme, they could bring in £8 billion to help pay for the energy price cap. Liz Truss always argued that this would send out the wrong message and discourage companies from investing in the UK, although interestingly, a few weeks ago, her administration did announce a cap on the profits made by renewable energy companies, which Labour described as a kind of windfall tax. And interestingly, a few weeks ago, the outgoing chief executive of Shell said it was inevitable that the companies would be facing more of a windfall tax. And he said governments should be taxing these companies more to help protect the poorest in society from the impact of these huge bills. All of this, £9.5 billion bumper profits, adding to the pressure on the Chancellor and the Prime Minister ahead of that autumn statement in November the 17th.
Amanda, many thanks. And of course, Nadeem Zahawi just on the programme a minute ago, refusing to be drawn on the possibility of perhaps an extension to the windfall tax. I'd say watch this space. But still to come on the programme today, Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy will be on the sofa at 8 o'clock. As demonstrators in Iran continue to protest the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody, I'll be speaking to the activist Nasreen Parvaz, who alleges that she was systematically tortured while serving 8 years in the country's prison system. And as the Royal British Legion launches its annual Poppy Appeal, I'll be speaking to an RAF veteran who served in Afghanistan about how the charity helped support her as she returned to civilian life. Well, let's turn to Ukraine now and the offensive to retake the city of Kherson from Russia. Ukraine's defence minister has admitted the counter-offensive is proving difficult because of poor weather and the nature of the terrain. Well, the city of Kherson itself is certainly strategically important to both Russia and Ukraine. The reason? Its position on the Dnipro River and its proximity to the annexed, of course, Crimea. Our team entered one of the surrounding villages, Velika. Alexandrivka, now dealing with the aftermath of Russian occupation. From there, Sky's international correspondent John Sparks reports.
As the Russians retreat from communities in Kherson, residents are left with reminders of their stay. A swathe of destruction in towns and villages like Velika, Alexandrivka. It can be difficult to take it all in. This quiet community spent months on the front line. And the fire chief suggested we investigate the local school. He led us into an underground room, and we could see it had been used by the Russians. We saw lewd graffiti and the letter Z, the symbol of Russia's war in Ukraine, along with the date the Russians took over this town, 2602. Fire Chief Volodymyr beckoned us into the gloom, and we realized it was more than just a bomb shelter. This community school had been turned into a military base.
Бачите, які вони собі умови здали, це все з магазинів, людські, занавіски, килими, подушки. Все завісили, це вони тут проживали.
How many soldiers live down here, do you think?
Ну, щонайменше чоловік 200.
You think at least 200?
Щонайменше 200? Так.
This subterranean labyrinth had been dressed in soft furnishings, the occupants seemingly planning to stay.
It's very strange. There are a dozen rooms down here, maybe more, and they've all been decorated with this tent-like effect. The soldiers have been trying to make it look like home, I think.
There were multiple kitchens and places to eat, and some items looked surprisingly luxurious. We found perfumes and silk bedding. Members of this garrison made a swift departure, but some have threatened to return.
It's interesting, this message left on the wall down here says, soon we'll return, soon we'll come back. Sinister.
The war was fought on the upper 3 floors in a school that had been turned into a fortress. The classrooms were sandbagged with occasional slits so the Russians could fire their weapons. The school library deployed as a blast wall. And there were Putin-esque views scrolled on the walls.
Come and take a look at this. This is the English language room. And see what they've done to the map of Great Britain.
The UK and Ireland had been covered with a Z, plus Rossiya, or Russia, at the bottom.
It's sad, isn't it? I mean, the school's been trashed.
Звичайно, сумно. Взагалі сумно все. Побистріше перемогти їх і почати все відбудовувати.
But it will cost hundreds of billions of pounds to rebuild this country, and the conflict goes on. Most residents fled before the Russian occupation, but those who stayed have been marked by it. Tatiana told us the soldiers were only boys.
Да, вони сказали, що їх заставили. Ну, якщо, каже, ми вернемося назад, нас наші розстріляють. Це так вони самі казали, хлопці, молоді ці росіяни, хлопчики, і кажуть, якщо ми назад вернемося, наші ж нас уб'ють.
Did you feel sorry for them?
Дітей шкода всіх. Господи, випаш мене. Ото коза, щоб мене допустили, я б сама його по кусочках різала б. Ножом би, отого Путіна. Імперії захотів, а?
This unpopular war may have come to a close in this town at least. But the battle to the south for the city of Kherson will be savage. Joy in liberation must be balanced with the pain. John Sparks, Sky News, in Velika, Alexandrivka.
Time for a quick look at some of the day's other headlines now. And a parliamentary inquiry has warned that Britain's national security is at risk because of a failure to prepare for the increasing risks of extreme weather due to climate change. The Joint Committee on the National Security Strategy said it was a severe dereliction of duty that no minister was prepared to take responsibility for ensuring vital power, transport and communications networks remaining resilient. Months of political turmoil at Westminster could cost the taxpayer up to £726,000 in severance payments. Analysis by Sky News has found that nearly all of the 79 ministers and whips who were sacked or resigned so far this year are eligible for the payments, averaging more than £10,000. Schools which ban Afro hairstyles without making exceptions on racial grounds are likely to be acting unlawfully. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has issued new guidance saying that school policies shouldn't unfairly single out children because they have Afro hair. The Northern Ireland Assembly has been recalled in a last-ditch effort to form a devolved government before tonight's midnight deadline. 6 months after the Stormont election, the DUP is refusing to restore power sharing with Sinn Féin, demanding changes to the Brexit protocol. Well, with no sign of breakthrough, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, is poised to call a second election before Christmas. Our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, has been talking to younger voters.
Struggling to break free from the same old politics, they represent a new generation of voters. Callum, Mark and Sophie work with young people from lower income families and have more pressing concerns than the Brexit protocol.
The reality is paying your bills is harder now than actually discussing the protocol. I don't really care about the protocol anymore. I'm more concerned about the people in the community that can't afford their oil bill, that can't, afford their food.
Prices have went through the roof, and I'm seeing it through school and just in everyday life. Like in school, I'm paying nearly £10 for a meal, and that's just to feed myself for one day.
It's 6 months since Sinn Féin's historic victory, winning the most seats at Stormont. Michelle O'Neill on course to become the first nationalist to hold the office of First Minister. But the DUP won't restore power sharing unless the Brexit border in the Irish Sea is scrapped. So Northern Ireland faces another election, much to the frustration of these young voters.
Young people want to go on a holiday, young people want to be able to afford to get a house, young people want to be able to grow up and get married, young people want a society that works, rather than what flags flying on the lamppost outside. That isn't like the main issue right now. And whether you're British or Irish, if you can't afford these things, what's the use in either, really?
Northern Ireland has the lowest disposable income in the UK and the highest energy prices. There's little appetite for a rerun of the poll at a cost of £6.5 million. If there's another election, it will illustrate two things: the damage Brexit and the resulting protocol has done to power sharing in Northern Ireland, and the widening gulf between the people and the politics. Because many voters are more concerned about how they heat the house and put food on the table than they are about where Northern Ireland's political future lies. If there's no power in the corridors at Stormont, there's no hope for people when they need it most. And that could signal the end of Good Friday Agreement politics. David Blevins, Sky News in Belfast.
Welcome back. Quick reminder as to our top stories this hour. And Rishi Sunak is facing pressure to protect the triple lock on pensions after Downing Street refused to confirm whether or not they'll rise in line with inflation. And in the last hour, the oil giant Shell has posted quarterly profits of $9.5 billion. On this programme, the Conservative Party chairman defended the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, for breaking the ministerial code, saying she deserved a second chance. Well, let's bring you a little more on that story. The Conservative Party chairman, the new Conservative Party chairman, Nadhim Zahawi, told the programme that the Home Secretary does have full security clearance, despite resigning just a week ago over a security breach. She was, of course, reappointed by Rishi Sunak.
The Prime Minister has looked at this. The Home Secretary herself, if you recall, in her letter, said, I made a mistake. I'm not going to deny that or shirk away from it. I will resign. She resigned, quite rightly. The new Prime Minister dealt with this yesterday, looked at it, and he felt that she, and as I would feel, she is allowed a second chance.
So there were multiple breaches of the ministerial code there. So the use of the personal email address, the leaking of sensitive government information, sending it to the wrong email address. I mean, that in and of itself are multiple breaches. But again, we will ask the same questions that were asked in the House of Commons yesterday. Did officials raise concerns about Suella Braverman? Did the Cabinet Secretary warn against her reappointment?
So officials raise concerns and raise points with Secretary of State with ministers all the time, and I think they should be allowed to do that. And having discussions on air about what officials advise ministers, I think would be unhealthy for the way we run our country, because they have to feel free they can do that without being quoted publicly.
The Home Secretary. There is a security dimension here. I mean, does she have full security clearance?
The Home Secretary has full security clearance, of course. But what I'm really trying to say to you is she didn't, try and hide away or try and brush this under the carpet.
Report it. Despite the fact that Rishi Sunak claimed that yesterday in the House of Commons, it wasn't the Home Secretary who reported her behaviour. It was identified, and she got sacked for it.
She admitted her mistake. She resigned. She resigned, and she apologised. And actually, people, in my view, I hope you agree with me, are allowed a second chance.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Ali Fortis. Good morning, Ali. Look, we can leave aside the semantics of sacking or resigning, but it does still feel that this Suella Braverman story has a bit to run, particularly because there are some significant questions still to be answered about what was advised and who knew what and when.
Yeah, I think the big question is, from Beth Ruby, our political editor's sources, it looks like the Prime Minister was warned by the Cabinet Secretary about Suella Braverman. Concerns were raised. On that, this morning, Nadhim Zahawi said to you, look, concerns are often raised by civil servants. That's the way things work. It's best he doesn't talk about that on TV. But clearly, I think this is something that Labour are going in hard on. And clearly, I think it's something that people are probably on the outside quite surprised by, the fact that 6 days since someone was sacked for breaking the ministerial code, they're back in the job. This is someone that obviously, her endorsing Rishi Sunak was a big moment for him over the weekend. She has massive sway on the right of the party. At the moment, there is no sign at all that she is going anywhere. I think it would be, we're not there yet, it would be a big problem for him if she was on the back benches, if she went with a fight. So he is trying to hold on to his Home Secretary. Labour calling for an investigation. They spent a lot of Prime Minister's questions yesterday talking about a grubby deal that they allege happened, saying that this is a Prime Minister who said he's all about integrity, but actually nothing's changed. I think it is potentially very damaging, because Rishi Sunak is trying to paint himself as someone who's different from his two predecessors, someone who can be trusted, someone who can level with people. And if these questions continue to loom over him, that could be very difficult.
Certainly could. Ali, much more from you throughout the programme. For now, thanks very much indeed. But let's take you back to that breaking news we had a little earlier this hour. Shell announcing its third quarter profits of $9.5 billion. But while the big energy companies enjoy huge profits, everyone else is struggling with rising bills. And there are growing concerns about whether or not the lights will stay on this winter. Joining us on the programme, Christina Rabasaita, energy analyst and the chief executive of the renewable energy platform Papaya. Christina, lovely to have you on the programme this morning. First and foremost, are you in any way shocked by the level of profit that Shell continues to enjoy at this time at least?
I think seeing where the markets are right now and where they have been for the last 18 months, I'm in no way shocked of how much profit they've made this quarter. So, no.
But aren't we, in essence, aren't large parts of the world in hock to the oil and energy industries, at least until fossil fuels begin to appear to be running out? There seems to be so much of our industry, power generation and so on, that is so reliant that despite the push to renewables, there will always be a sizable chunk of the world that still relies on the consumption of these fossil fuels.
So I think that's one thing that all parties, either on the renewable side or on the fossil fuel side, need to know that right now we need everybody in the game to reduce the bills, to create a stable, energy consumption and supply in the country. And it's as much as it's sort of scary to see how big of a profits are being made by certain companies. Also, it's important to understand that we have to be realistic about how we're going to provide the energy security, and fossil fuels still play a very big part in providing that. Unfortunately, as much as we'd love to, renewables cannot do it on their own. But hopefully with the support of the fossil fuels, and I'm sort of referring mostly to gas, which is still widely used and needed in our economy, we will be able to use those profits to invest into renewables, invest into battery storage, and help us get to that energy security and stability again.
The UK, of course, still incredibly reliant on gas as an energy source. I mean, what could you see the government in this country doing? And of course, we do have a new government at the moment, at least a new Prime Minister. What could they be doing to ramp up renewables as the primary source of our energy, to take us away, to take us to a point where there is absolutely no need for reliance on fossils?
So I think one of the biggest things that has to be done, because renewables are intermittent, so we can't guarantee or predict very well of how much energy they're going to generate over that past 1 week, for example. But to solve that, we need to heavily invest in battery storage and hydrogen. So anything that can change that intermittent shape of renewables is going to be the way forward to get rid of the fossil fuels and move to the greener future.
Christina Rabasaita, thanks very much for joining us on the programme. Now, hundreds of thousands of health workers across England, Wales and Northern Ireland are voting on whether to strike this winter over a pay offer that's less than the rate of inflation. Unison members, including nurses, paramedics, midwives and hospital staff from more than 250 NHS trusts, are being balloted. And I'm joined now on the programme by Unison's Deputy Head of Health, Helga Pike. Helga, lovely to have you on the programme this morning. Just explain the ballot on strike action. What is it that your members need?
So the staff in the NHS have had a pay award of just 72 pence an hour, and that's just nowhere near enough when they are struggling with the cost of living crisis, and they can't give good care when they're going to work hungry, they're going home to cold houses at the end of their long shifts. But equally, it's about the staffing crisis that they're seeing day in, day out. Not enough staff, and getting worse by the day because colleagues are leaving. They can get better paid jobs and they can have less stressful lives by going elsewhere. So this is about really trying to use a vote about strike action to ask the government to listen and to look at the facts and to see the 130,000 vacancies in England, and to understand that pay is a major part of this staffing crisis.
Give us an idea of what it is like then at the moment for those on the front line, particularly as we are seeing those COVID and flu infections creeping up pretty dramatically.
It's horrendous. I mean, if you look at every part of the system, whether it's ambulances queuing outside hospitals, some of our paramedics are saying they're in an ambulance with a sick patient for an entire shift because they can't get the patient discharged. It's things like blood supplies we've just heard are running low because there aren't enough staff to run the blood donor sessions. It's community staff, community healthcare assistants and nurses whose patients are getting sicker by the day because they're waiting for treatment. They're in that 7 million patient waiting list. And these staff don't want to leave their jobs. They love the work that they do, but they do have to pay their bills. And all they've heard so far from the government is, well, if you can get better paid jobs elsewhere, then that's what you should do. And that's not good enough because it's leaving patients unsafe and staff feeling demoralised and undervalued and as if the only option they have is to consider strike action.
What happens, Helga, in those circumstances? We are talking about hundreds of thousands of workers within the health service. If they were to go on strike en masse, that would bring the health service to its knees. So what is the plan if the ballot goes positive in favour of strike action?
Well, the first thing to say is strike action is not inevitable. It really is in the hands of the Prime Minister and the latest team in health and in the Treasury to use the fact that this is even happening as a wake-up call. So that's the first thing. Staff want to be able to say, look, we need you to listen. We need you to take this seriously. So voting in this ballot is a way of trying to create that pressure and that jolt to government that really this can't go on. So we really hope they listen to that and that we don't have to take it further and actually call people out on strike.
We've gone through a couple of prime ministers recently. We've gone through a couple of health secretaries. I wonder what faith you have that Steve Barclay might be the man to actually sort this situation out.
Well, we've carefully written to each health secretary as they've come in, and we'll continue to do that and to try to engage with Steve Barclay. And it's interesting to note that the new Chancellor was previously chair of the Health Select Committee, and he described this as the biggest workforce crisis in the history of the NHS. And we know that pay is a major factor. So let's hope that now perhaps there's a slightly more stable period ahead in terms of the politics, that they can actually turn their attention to the growing crisis that's in front of them in the health service.
Helga Pyle from Unison, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, the US midterm elections begin next month, a critical moment for the Republicans as they try to take back control of Congress. However, the Senate race in Georgia has already been smeared by accusations of hypocrisy, as the Republican hopeful Herschel Walker faces claims for a second time of encouraging and paying for a woman to get an abortion. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner reports.
Herschel Walker is, to his fans, an all-American hero, an NFL star turned politician, now running to be senator in his home state of Georgia.
I've been a lot of places, but in Wrightsville, I learned important lessons.
He's tapping into what's likely to be one of the decisive issues of the upcoming midterm elections, the right to choose abortion or not.
Georgia is a state that respects life, and I'll be a senator that protects life.
A man who, on the face of it, is vehemently anti-abortion. But is this a brazen display of political hypocrisy? Because two women are now alleging they became pregnant by Walker and that he pressured them into having an abortion. The latest enlisting a high-profile lawyer.
Mr. Walker clearly wanted her to have an abortion.
Breaking her silence via a conference call, but not her anonymity, she says, for fear of reprisals. This Jane Doe claims Walker drove her to a clinic and paid for the procedure.
I was devastated because I felt that I had been pressured into having an abortion. After the abortion, I felt that Herschel began distancing himself from me.
And this is a picture of Mr. Walker.
Jane Doe's legal team show me documents which they say prove she is telling the truth. Love letters from a 6-year affair, they say. A picture of Walker in a hotel room and a receipt from a Holiday Inn. Do you think this will have any effect on the political race? Do you think voters in Georgia care?
This is not just about the values of Herschel Walker. This is about the values of every voter. Because if they're voting for him, then they are expressing their values that it's okay to lie and it's okay not to have your deeds match your words.
On the campaign trail, Walker issuing yet another denial.
I'm done with this foolishness. I've already told people this is a lie.
The Republican Party has tied its hopes to Walker overcoming another well-known face in his opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock. If he does win, it could be decisive in their fight to gain control of Congress. And despite the scandal, this race is still neck and neck. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Los Angeles.
Welcome back. Northern Ireland looks to be heading for fresh elections. A midnight deadline is looming for a devolved government to be formed, and with the DUP still refusing to restore power sharing with Sinn Féin. No sign of a breakthrough, therefore, so a second poll is expected to be called before Christmas. Joining us now from Belfast, Dr. Claire Rice, an expert in devolution and power sharing at the University of Liverpool. Dr. Rice, great to have you on the programme this morning. And can you, if we possibly can, start by explaining why there has been no functional government in Northern Ireland for so long now?
Yes, it's quite a protracted story, so forgive me if I skim over some of the details here.
Not at all.
But essentially, we at the start of February of this year, we saw the resignation of the First Minister here in Northern Ireland, who was from the Democratic Unionist Party. That was a step that was taken in protest at the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is the aspect of the Brexit arrangements reached between the UK and the EU that deals specifically with Northern Ireland. Since then, we had an election then in May of this year, which somewhat changed the dynamics within the Northern Ireland Assembly. And since then, there have been several attempts to reconvene the Assembly. So what's meant by that is there have been a number of attempts to nominate a Speaker and their deputies to make the Northern Ireland Assembly functional again. So that has failed to happen. And what we're seeing happening today then is another attempt to get the Assembly back up and running again. It's not expected that this occasion will be any different to those that we have seen so far, but the added impetus here on this occasion is that there's a deadline that is approaching within a matter of hours at this stage, whereby if there isn't an Assembly back up and running, if an executive hasn't been reformed, then the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland will be legally obliged to call another election. So we're looking potentially at another election happening here in Northern Ireland, with the speculated date at this stage of the 15th of December.
I mean, rather begs the question, if that deadline is reached and breached, does an election sort anything out?
Largely, the general prevailing perspective on this is that no, it won't really change anything. You might see a bit of a redistribution of some of the votes, particularly around the DUP and the TUV, the Traditional Unionist Voice Party, and some votes moving within nationalism, perhaps. But by and large, the dynamics are going to remain the same. The only difference on this occasion might be that if there is an increase in the vote share for the Democratic Unionist Party, they might be able to take that or interpret that as leverage for essentially having a mandate to continue their position currently with regard to the Northern Ireland Protocol and to continue a boycott of the institutions. So ultimately what an election would lead to would be a hardening of the positions of the political parties themselves, which would make any talks and negotiations between them much more difficult, and also making it even more difficult in the aftermath to actually get things back up and going again. So essentially it could just end up protracting the situation even further.
Someone from that part of the world, admittedly in their cups, but someone from that part of the world did suggest to me at the weekend, part of the problem here is that the DUP simply do not want to be in a power-sharing arrangement with a Sinn Féin First Minister. I mean, what's your view on that assertion?
There have been mixed views on this. There have been some whispers coming from within the DUP that there might be unease at going into a power sharing arrangement with Sinn Féin, whereby Sinn Féin has the First Minister position and the DUP would be a Deputy First Minister position. But by the same token, that is a shared office. So it isn't exactly accurate to say that there would be a different type of unease in that relationship going forward, because it's a shared office. It would be a nominal difference between the two. So there's a symbolic difference that has emerged as a result of the last election in that regard. But I think by and large, the issue here isn't necessarily going into power sharing with Sinn Féin. It is very much the position on the Northern Ireland Protocol. It is very much the wider issues of unionism as a whole is feeling here in Northern Ireland that have been exacerbated by Brexit, that have been exacerbated by the impact of the protocol, and indeed the difficult relationship that we have seen, let's say, between particularly the DUP and the Conservative Party in Westminster.
And Claire, sorry to interrupt you there, but we are just out of time. Dr. Claire Rice, really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
And as the new PM appears to backtrack on promises to keep the triple lock on pensions, stay where you are, because after this, I'll be speaking to Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lamb.